Alright guys, so Congress is currently in the midst of debating an absolutely massive bill that essentially would be the most right-wing piece of immigration reform that we have had in this country in decades. And Democrats are willing to push forward and fight for this bill in order to, in exchange, get funding for Israel and for Ukraine. So we got a lot to get into here. Obviously, there are a bunch of different components of this bill. So I'm going to show you guys what's actually in this in terms of the immigration part of it. Then we're going to talk about Israel and Ukraine as well. So let's just go ahead and jump into it because there's a lot here. First from Bill Melugan giving his initial thoughts, and I think this is a good summary of the gist of what's in this. Starting off with no amnesty or legalization of anyone already in the United States illegally or who's undocumented. So, I mean, this is kind of important for obvious reasons. Ryan Grimm made the point that typically when there have been talks of some sort of a bipartisan immigration bill, that something that Democrats is a key sticking point for them is that they want some sort of a firm pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. This does not have that. Again, in exchange for passing the rest of this bill, they're not asking for this, they're asking for Israel funding and Ukraine funding. Okay, they also say there are funds to increase ICE detention capacity to approximately 50,000 from the current 34,000. Keep in mind, ICE loves to use private prisons, for-profit prisons, so now we're going to be warehousing more migrants who are coming across in some of these for-profit detention centers. It also says that at a 7-day rolling average of 5,000 encounters per day, which is a pretty important benchmark because we've been hitting that a number of different times, I mean repeatedly over the last couple of months. So at 5,000 encounters per day, or 8,500 encounters in a single day, the Department of Homeland Security is required to shut the border down and turn away anyone who crosses. They say no new asylum claims will be allowed and anybody crossing will be removed. So, I mean, first off, guys, you have a legal right, international law, US law as well, you have a legal right to come and claim asylum. And then you have to go through due process and your asylum claim is adjudicated. We have a broken asylum system, so it takes fucking forever in this country. But you have a legal right to claim this. So essentially what this border is saying, this bill is saying, is that once we meet a certain benchmark of a certain amount of people coming into the country, 5,000 on average or 8,500 in a single day, you just lose all of your legal rights to claim asylum. So, I mean, obviously draconian and probably illegal, but they say it would also end the idea of I made it to the US soil so you have to process me. That would be over. Border Patrol would not process the illegal crossers and they would immediately be removed. No asylum claim permitted unless it's made at a port of entry. This does not mean that 5,000, the first 5,000, are allowed in. It just means that they have to go through a similar asylum claim process, right? Due process, as they should be given, right? The issue there is not that we have too many people necessarily at the border, it's that we don't have enough resources, judges, in order to process all of these different asylum claims. That's the actual issue, not that we need to just shut down the border entirely and remove people's right to claim asylum if we reach a certain arbitrary benchmark. It also says that it significantly is tougher on asylum requirements and a higher credible fear standard, including 3 bars to eligibility. Number 1, criminal history. 2, could they have resettled in another country on the way to the US? 3, could they have resettled somewhere else in their own country? So you're adding like means testing, further means testing to this asylum process. They also say that it's going to add 50,000 new visas over 5 years, which doesn't seem like a lot, 10,000 visas per year. There's funding to hire hundreds more ICE deportation officers, Border Patrol agents, and USCIS asylum officers, and greatly increases the number of deportation flights. So again, it's pretty draconian. We're giving a bunch of funding to Customs and Border Patrol and ICE to go and either warehouse people in detention camps or to immediately fly them back and deport them without any real due process. They do say that no unaccompanied minors can be removed, and some of these minors will receive attorneys, either pro bono or taxpayer funded. So I guess now children will be given the right to have legal counsel. I mean, this is where we're at in this country, where this is considered like a small win in this terrible bill. I mean, children getting lawyers, great, we did it. We're a humane country now, I guess. They say it ends some of the catch and release, but not all, so families and unaccompanied minors will not be detained. Right? They say for context, again, the border has seen at least 5,000 encounters almost every single day in the last couple of years. So if the bill is signed into law, the border is going to be shut down on the first day that it takes effect. effectively, again, eliminating people's right to come to the country and claim asylum. So, I mean, this is basically everything, well, not everything, but almost everything that Republicans could possibly ask for. Of course, they're bitching and moaning and saying this is an open borders bill, as they always do, no matter how right-wing Democrats go on this issue. So they're saying it still doesn't go far enough, that it's too loose, even with all of these draconian measures and the increases of funding to ICE and, you know, the expansions of the detention centers and funding for Customs and Border Patrol and dramatic increases on, you know, the deportation flights and the crackdowns on the amount of people who are even able to claim asylum and restricting the asylum process. Even with all of that, and with no amnesty or legalization process for anybody in the U.S. who is here illegally or is undocumented, even with all of that, the best that Republicans are possibly going to get through the U.S. Congress, unless they somehow get a supermajority in the Senate and a supermajority in the House, even with all of that, they're still saying they're probably not going to pass this. So this is the whip count, according to Michael Tracy here. So this is from like last night-ish, almost. So this could be a little bit outdated. More people may have dropped off, but he says that it's looking like it's probably going to pass 66 to 34 in the Senate. Now in the House, it's an entirely different situation because House Speaker Mike Johnson is saying no, it's dead on arrival. So it's yet to be seen exactly what's going to happen here. Maybe they end up breaking up this bill into an Israel bill and then a Ukraine bill and then a border bill. But, you know, this national security bill, it looks like it may pass the Senate. Maybe it doesn't pass the House. I don't know. We'll have to keep track of this, right? Again, even just calling this a national security bill to me shows the flaw of Democrats' strategy on this. And I'll talk about them here in a second. I do want to mention that it's very obvious what Republicans are doing, right? This is all just political posturing. Again, if Donald Trump wins, because their idea is that we want to help Donald Trump run on immigration as an issue for 2024, because that's the biggest motivating factor for Republicans, according to the polls right now. Immigration is their top issue. So they don't want to give Biden a win on immigration. So they're saying we're going to basically tank this to help Donald Trump's, 2024 chances against Biden. So that's obvious political posturing here. But even if Trump wins in 2024, the idea that you are going to be able to get a more draconian bill like this passed is delusional. If it's under a Trump administration, remember what it was like with Democratic opposition, and all of the screaming about the kids in cages and the border wall is ridiculous, which, by the way, this bill that Biden is backing right now has funding for miles and miles of more border walls. So you have Democrats who've done a complete 180 just because it's a Democrat in the White House right now, willing to give 80% of what Republicans could possibly dream of, certainly more than they would be able to get under a Trump administration, because Democrats would obviously vote against this and use their posturing to be, we're pro-immigrant now that Trump's the president, to be against something like this. So it's the best they could possibly ask for. They're killing it because they want to help Trump for 2024. And then on top of that, on Tuesday, they're launching an impeachment inquiry for the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, for not being harsher on immigration. So we're impeaching the Department of Homeland Security Secretary for not being harsh enough on immigration, while also voting against an incredibly draconian right-wing immigration bill to give the Border Patrol and ICE all of these enhanced powers and to crack down on the amount of people coming over to the United States. So on the Republican side, I don't want to let them off easy. It's all just political posturing bullshit. That's what this is at the end of the day. And Republicans love having the issue of immigration on their side to get chaotic images on Fox News of, the border, we're being invaded, right? We're under attack from all of these scary immigrants, right? They love having that as an issue. And they're openly admitting it, right? They've come out and said, we don't support this because we don't want to hurt Trump's chances. So that's very obvious political posturing. But so is, the Democratic side of this as well. And it's posturing in a way that is utterly and completely delusional. I mean, even on MSNBC, which is supposed to be like, MSDNC, right? The mouthpiece for the Democratic Party. They're so woke and communist and all that good stuff, right? But even there, we have somebody like Al Sharpton, who I thought was, trying to pretend to be a progressive. He says, you're getting migrants beating up policemen in the streets of New York. We're looking every day at the invasion of migrants. So even on MSNBC, with like self-proclaimed, center-left people or progressives and Democrats here like Chris Murphy on the screen, even they are saying this is an invasion. So you are completely giving in to the Republican fear-mongering, the scapegoating of immigrants that Republicans love to do. You're giving into their entire narrative, even by calling this bill a national security bill, that the issue at the border is a national security issue. It's not. It's a logistics issue. Sure, it's chaotic. It's not an orderly process, but that's an issue with funding on how we are going through the process of being able to process the people who are coming into the country, give them a pathway to citizenship, adjudicate asylum claims, etc., etc. It's not a problem of a lack of militarization of the border. That completely ignores the underlying, core realities of what's currently happening. But even on MSNBC, they're using rhetoric like this. And Democrats seem to think, based on what I've seen in the media over the last couple of days, based on what I've seen from Biden and other, top Democratic leadership people, they seem to think that like this is a winning issue for them. Again, this is one of the, if not the single, motivating factor for Republicans heading into the 2024 election. How is this going to help? Do you really think that Trump supporters are going to flip over to Biden and be like, oh, now Biden's harsher on the border, right? Over the guy who ran his entire campaign last time with a 3-word catchphrase, build the wall. Yeah, people are going to flip from Trump to Biden because, oh, now Biden's the hard one on immigration. You're feeding into their narrative. You're not going to win over any Republicans by being more draconian and militaristic on the border issue. And you're going to, in the meantime, piss off, a large contingency of your base of voters, of your base of supporters who are in favor of addressing the border issue, but in an actual humane way, not just in giving Republicans everything that they want. And so it is delusional from top to bottom in any way that you want to look at it. And I mean, seriously, think about all of these Republicans, or Democrats, these same liberals who just a couple years ago under Trump were saying that he's the worst, he's basically Hitler, right? Pushing forward with all of these draconian border policies and building the wall and detaining kids and all this and that. And with all of that preaching, with all of that political posturing, when they were running against Trump, now when it's Biden doing 80-70% of the same policies that Trump wanted, now they're all suddenly flipping around and they're like, well, we're the rational ones. We're actually trying to address the border issue. I mean, Jesus Christ, man. So moving on a little bit here to Ukraine. So it's pointed out here by Michael Tracy. So there's a lot of Ukraine funding, billions. I think it's like $60 billion or so that's supposed to be going to Ukraine. The bill requires a submission to Congress within 45 days of a strategy regarding U.S. support for Ukraine on a multi-year time horizon for achieving victory against Russian invasion forces. So it's $50 billion first, then strategy later. 2 years in, apparently we still don't have a strategy for Ukraine. I mean, listen, I'm obviously not a fan of Vladimir Putin. The invasion was entirely justifiable. But we are now 2 years in, and it really does not seem like there is any legitimate strategy for some sort of an off-ramp or a conclusion to this. Guys, there have been hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russian troops, and Ukrainian civilians who have been killed so far. The stalemate has been going on for how long now? I mean, are the lines on the map really moving significantly at this point? Obviously, in an ideal world, most people, I think, would want Vladimir Putin to simply tuck his tail between his legs and walk out of Ukraine. But that's not happening. The sanctions aren't working. The Russian economy is still doing fine, right? You've done everything that you can on that front. You've been sending billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in defensive weaponry to Ukraine, which you can make a defense for, sure. But at this point, it's like, what are we actually doing? What is the plan here? What is the off-ramp? Where does some sort of a negotiation come into play? Because it doesn't look like if you give them another $50 billion, that's going to change the reality of the battle lines on the map. It's just not. It's just not realistic that Ukraine is going to be able to push Russian forces out of every inch of Ukraine as our Congress seems to believe that they can do. And what is the purpose of any of this at this point? Just more bloodshed, more death, more destruction, endless war to try to bleed out our political adversary in Russia? I mean, it seems like that's literally the goal, while simultaneously enriching, weapons manufacturers, defense contractors, etc. I mean, $50 billion first, then we'll figure out a strategy later, I guess. We also had this here from Chuck Schumer, saying that if the border bill isn't passed, including the Ukraine aid, that Americans will basically have to go and fight in Eastern Europe. Because something Putin's going to go and invade the rest of Europe after he's done with Ukraine, I guess, right? The actual strategy, I mean, you have to at some point push forward with negotiations. You have to get an end to the war in Ukraine. I personally do not believe that Vladimir Putin wants to go and conquer the world. All right, he's gotten bogged down in Ukraine just by Western countries, predominantly the United States, funding Ukraine as a proxy and giving them weapons. And people think, what, he has world domination plans, that he's going to go and get into a direct hot war with NATO? I mean, what are we talking about here? But he seems to think, yeah, U.S. troops are going to have to go on and fight on the ground, in Ukraine or in Eastern Europe, if we don't get another $50 billion to Ukraine to go drag the war on another 6 months or whatever, to where we then go and revisit it and potentially give them another aid package, even though nothing has really changed on the ground. I mean, it really is, it's gross to me. And we also have this, moving on to the Houthis and Israel as well. Also here from Michael Tracy, under the radar, the Senate also wants to skirt any authorization debate around the ongoing U.S. operations in the Red Sea and Iraq and Syria by simply handing over $2.4 billion to cover the operations, no questions asked. $2.4 billion to go do what exactly? To go bomb Yemen, one of the poorest countries on earth, because they're, the Houthis are going and attacking ships in the Red Sea to try to apply pressure on Israel and the United States to end the genocide in Yemen. We're just going to keep bombing Yemen over and over and over again, learning nothing from like the 7-8 years of US-backed Saudi bombing in Yemen that led to the world's worst humanitarian crisis at the time that still is not even resolved to this day. We're just going to keep bombing Yemen. We learned absolutely nothing, right? We're going to keep bombing Iraq. How many years have we been bombing Iraq again? Has it produced peace and stability or anything advantageous for the United States of America? Jesus Christ, man. And Syria as well. Why are we in Iraq, by the way? Why do we still have troops in Iraq? Why do we still have troops in the region that they're even in a position to be killed? Like I talked about, last week when we had 3 U.S. troops who were killed in Jordan, by the way, a place that 99% of Americans didn't even know that we had troops stationed in. I mean, why do we still have troops here, guys? There's no justifiable reason for it whatsoever, let alone to continue waging a shadow war that the Biden administration is still denying is even a broader war. They're still trying to pretend that what Israel is doing in Gaza has been entirely contained there. That the attacks on U.S. troops that dramatically rose after October 7th, that the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, none of that is connected. It's all just, evil people attacking us because they hate us. They hate us because they ain't us, basically. And so we have to just give billions and billions and billions of dollars, not to healthcare, not to education, not to help out the American people, but just to continue endless wars with no end in sight, with no real achievable strategies for what this is going to win in the long run. Just bombing for the sake of bombing, right? To posture towards Iran in the region. They also say that this national security bill specifically exempts funds from Israel from congressional oversight. That any congressional notification requirement applicable to funds made available under this heading in this act for Israel may be waived if the Secretary of State determines that to do so is in the national security interests of the United States. So we're giving Israel, right, already $3.5 billion. We've been doing that for years and years and years. This is adding additional billions on top of that. I think I've seen estimates between like 15 billion, 17 billion, somewhere around that benchmark, right? So we're giving them billions of dollars more. Why do they need the money? I don't know. You tell me. To continue the genocide? Is that what we're doing? So we're going to give them billions more dollars to continue what the ICJ found was a plausible genocide inside of Gaza, further, making ourselves complicit in all of this, or making Joe Biden and his administration complicit in all of this. And it's not even going to have congressional oversight. I mean, keep in mind, Congress voted against just a couple of weeks ago a bill that was brought up by Bernie Sanders just to have the State Department produce a report as to whether or not Israel was in violation of human rights law. They didn't even want to look into whether or not Israel was violating human rights law. Why? Because guess what? It's against U.S. law under the Leahy Act for the United States to give weapons, to give this kind of funding to anybody who is in violation of international law or human rights laws. And so they just, we're not going to look at it. We're just not going to do any oversight whatsoever. Just take the money under the table, do whatever you want with it, I guess. Does this look like Joe Biden? I mean, the same Joe Biden who we get all of these reports, Joe Biden is so furious with Netanyahu behind the scenes. I just saw another one, right? And there have been dozens of these since October 7th of how frustrated he is with Bibi. And I saw another one the other day where some member of the Biden team leaked to the press, behind the scenes, Joe Biden says that Bibi is a bad fucking guy. That's what you get. That's what we get, right? That's the best that you could possibly ask for. No accountability, no strings attached to any of the money that we are giving them, not even any public pressure in any way, shape, or form. The best that we get is Joe Biden, behind the scenes apparently, reportedly, maybe hypothetically, saying Benjamin Netanyahu is a bad guy who I'm going to continue giving billions of dollars in unchecked weaponry to do anything that he wants with it. I mean, it's just a joke at this point. It's a sick joke. And Biden also came out in another form of posturing and sanctioned 4 Israeli settlers for engaging in violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Didn't sanction Netanyahu for being pro-expansion of those illegal settlements. Didn't sanction Israel for the expansion of the illegal settlements. Not even Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich were sanctioned. Okay, the 2 most far-right, insane terrorist lunatics in the Israeli government. Didn't even sanction them. Just 4 individual Israeli settlers with sanctions that are basically not even really applicable to them. That's going to do absolutely nothing. But he just does that to pretend as if, I'm really trying behind the scenes to tamp down on Israel. It's just a sick joke, man. We also had this here. A bipartisan border Israel-Ukraine package blocks all funding from the UNRWA from the United States. So obviously Joe Biden already cut off U.S. funding, along with, a dozen other countries, Western allies, to the UNRWA. Now, this is codifying that into law. So something I heard Chuck Schumer say in that same clip, we didn't watch it, but something else he says is, I care so much about the humanitarian situation, the crisis on the ground in Gaza. And so this bill has some money in it that's supposedly designated for the people of Gaza. How exactly are you going to get that aid to the people of Gaza while you're actively cutting off and kneecapping the main agency that is responsible and capable of facilitating this kind of aid, this level of aid to the people of Gaza? It's impossible. The UNRWA is essentially the only agency that's really possible of handling this at the scale that it needs to be handled. And there already hasn't been enough aid getting into the people of Gaza anyways, and you're choosing to cut that funding, right? And it's also a sick joke on the back end of it, because you're giving some crumbs of aid to the people of Gaza while also continuing to give weapons to Israel to worsen the humanitarian crisis? I mean, what are we doing here? And we also had an update, by the way, on the same story that I talked about a couple days ago. So obviously the Biden administration, again, they cut funding to the UNRWA on completely flimsy allegations that were made by Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence apparatus. And we got an update here from Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept. And he says, Israel's so-called UNRWA dossier, which they just released, which was laundered by the United States government in the Wall Street Journal as some smoking gun, has now been seen by other media. And I actually saw a leaked version of this myself as well. Channel 4, which did an analysis of it, says it provides no evidence to support its explosive new claim that the UNRWA staff were involved with terror attacks on Israel. No evidence. No evidence to... This is what led to the Joe Biden administration, dozen other countries, to cut aid in the middle of one of the world's worst humanitarian crises on the face of the planet, based off mere allegations that had no evidence. Guys, I saw the report. I saw this dossier that Israel put out. It's literally just a list of names and then just random allegations against them. This guy went into Israel on October 7th. This guy bought a rocket launcher before October 7th. This guy went close to the border on October 7th. No evidence whatsoever that was provided to actually back up the claims, right? And they use that to cut off funding to the United Relief Works Agency, right? Further starving the people of Gaza. And again, even if the allegations were true, which it looks like they're not, but even if they were true, how insane is it? How psychopathic and bloodthirsty is it to cut off aid to 2 million people who are currently displaced, who are starving, who are being bombed into oblivion? And we're talking about like 500,000 or more that are on the verge of famine. And you cut off aid because what? Israel alleged that 12 members of the 13,000 strong UNRWA participated in some way, shape, or form in Hamas's attack on October 7th. Even if all 12 of them had committed the worst atrocities on October 7th, that wouldn't justify the collective punishment of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. Utterly insane. And the same principle, they would never apply the same principle to Israel, right? And I saw John Fetterman was questioned by another Intercept reporter, Prem Thakur, on that exact same thing, on the logic behind that. Well, this is the logic of you cutting funding to the UNRWA. Well, why does that not apply to Israel? Because we have war crime after war crime after war crime directly documented, in many cases by IDF soldiers themselves, openly admitting their war crimes. So we have more than just mere zero evidence allegations against the IDF for committing war crimes. So you cut off funding to the UNRWA based on allegations of war crimes. Why does that not apply to Israel? Because based on the same exact logic that was used here, Israel should have lost funding a long time ago, right? But no, when it's our ally, you can commit war crimes in broad daylight for 100 days straight in front of the entire world. You can have the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the entire world, bring a genocide case against you, find that it's plausible. And still, now what do? Do we cut funding like we did to the UNRWA? No, we increase funding to them. Billions of dollars in additional aid is what's given to them. So this is the Joe Biden administration for you. Meanwhile, in Israel, and I've talked about this a number of different times, but it seems like it's only escalating at this point. We have Israelis, civilians, as the IDF soldiers kind of look on here, some of them are grappling with them, it looks like, but still going out and just choosing voluntarily to go and protest any of the few humanitarian trucks that are getting into Gaza. So over the last couple of weeks as this has been going on, I mean, to say a tiny fraction of the aid that is needed for Gaza is getting in is an understatement, right? Even if none of these protesters were there, even if Israel was, fully compliant there probably still wouldn't be enough aid getting into Gaza, given how bad the situation is. But Israel is blocking a lot of the aid, upwards of like 70% of it. Now these protesters are blocking the aid. Now the United States, the United Kingdom, all these other governments are cutting aid. I mean, what are we supposed to conclude from this? That the United States, the rest of these governments, Israel, they just want to starve the people of Gaza. Even many of these Israeli civilians are just pro-starvation, pro-disease, pro-famine, pro-genocide, pro-ethnic cleansing. I don't know how else to possibly analyze this. We also had this. According to Ryan Grimm, Israeli Navy strafed a food convoy. So, I mean, this is what it looks like, guys. Blocking the aid from getting in, cutting funding to get the aid in, and now directly bombing some of these aid convoys. So, I mean, there you go, guys. I mean, I know that was a long video, but you have multiple different components of this bill that add up to it just being absolute garbage. I mean, it's an incredibly right-wing immigration deal that I don't think is going to, even if it were to be passed, remotely address the actual issues at the border, which is, again, not an issue of a lack of criminalization or a lack of militarization of the border. It's a process issue. It is a logistical issue. There's not enough resources to effectively process the people who are coming into this country, give them a pathway to citizenship, adjudicate their asylum claims. That's the actual issue at the border, if there even is one. And so it doesn't address that. And it's also a political nightmare for Joe Biden, who's just elevating an issue that is like Trump's biggest winning issue going into the next election. And you have fucking Republicans on the other side who also are playing politics and don't want to pass it anyways, even though it's a wish list for them, because they want to help Trump run on this in 2024. And then you also have the Ukraine funding, no real strategy or plan in sight for any sort of an end to that, to end the bloodshed, the destruction. And then you have the Israel component, worsening the humanitarian crisis on the ground, continuing to give no strings attached, unlimited billions of dollars in funds to Israel as they commit what is, I think, accurately being referred to as a genocide against the people of Gaza. And, this is what the Democratic Party is fighting for. This is what we get under Joe Biden, under a Democratic Senate. This is the kind of shit that they're doing. Horrible policy and horrible politics.